question on E, please, as well, Tim?
Okay. So Dara, I've lost track of where we're at here.
So where I think, subject to the council's question, we've got a motion that would adopt the consent agenda with the exception of items 2G, H, and J. I don't know if that's something that the board wants to adopt at this point in time.
Okay.
And
So
Councillor Fletcher said, Councillor Fletcher indicated she wanted to hold item E.
Yes, we have, that's what Dara said. E, H, and J, is it, or how?
E, G, H, and J.
E, G, H, and J. Okay, seconder for that motion? No, I think you moved it, John. Seconder Brian? Or you did now? Okay, all those in favor?
Oh, I
Carried.
had a question. I had a question.
You did have a question. Sorry if I preempted you, Paula.
No, I just had a very quick question on F when we're looking at that pass and then somebody didn't turn something in. I'd just like to understand that too. So there's a few questions. It won't take long, but.
Okay.
That.
So I think, Councillor Fletcher, you had questions about 2E.
Yeah, 2E, my question just is, the Sparkle Solutions, was that could you confirm that was the company that was started by TCHC as an enterprise that we then sold and now we are buying those services still?
That's correct. Fletcher, that's correct.
That's correct. And when did we dispose of that? Remember? Just want everybody to know we used to have the company. When?
John? Councilor Fletcher, I believe it occurred in 2010. When that
2010 after the auditor. And what, okay. But we're purchasing those from there in a satisfactory way. Thank you. That was my question.
Okay.
Tim, I have a question.
Yeah, John?
So why did it take so long to post the RFP? Why did it take until February? We knew the contract was expiring. The company received a 10-year extension, and it looks like in 2000, it was good. No, in 2010 they received a 10-year extension. So for 10 years the contract is coming due. Why did it take so long to do an RFP? What was the cause of the delay?
John? So I think it was Council Judge so I can only speak from last summer. I think there was a need to establish a department to provide oversight. So in the fall last year, it's taken a bit longer to hire a team within the new restructured division to lead the RFP. And also part of this RFP, considering that the contract has been direct awarded for the last 15 years, it involved a bit more time from a research perspective, consultation, to actually build out the RFP and requirements. As for the actual 10-year contract, unfortunately, I don't have the answer on why it waited till the tail end to issue the new RFP.
So it just seems so they got a contract in 2005. Presumably that was through an RFP. I can't imagine things would have changed that much. They were then extended. Then before the term was up, they were given a 10-year contract. So I just don't understand how an organization can let all that time pass, let the contract expire before giving consideration to the next step and opening up the process. It just seems like somebody dropped the ball. I don't know who did, but somebody dropped the ball, and now we're left extending the contract to a company we may not want to do business with in the future. Am I missing something? Is this too harsh of a critique?
So if I could, Director, we formed a contract compliance unit that the board had never had before on staff, had to structure an RFP for what is a very considerable contract of great importance to tenants. We had to conduct a proper inventory of the equipment that we hadn't had in the past. It took time to
scope and get an RFP out so that we could come back with a good business decision.
I mean, okay, and I won't belabor the point. I respect all that. I understand that. And the question is, why didn't this process not begin in 2018 or 2019, knowing that the contract was coming up? It strikes me that somebody didn't do what they were supposed to have done. So those are the only comments in there.
I think that's a fair comment.
Okay.
Anything else in 2E?
We're just glad you're on top of it now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So we have a,
Can we have a motion to approve? For Paula, seconded. I can't see the whole, I don't know, I can. Brian, can you mind seconding? So all in favor? Carried. You had a question on F, I think, Paula.
No, I don't. It's fine, please. Yes.
Okay, do we
Can we
pass
just have-
F?
can we have
Yeah.
a motion then to adopt F?
Yeah.
So moved.
Paula, seconded by Adele. All those in favor? Aye. And then we had G, H, and J. So G, well, I think you were looking to have
Yeah,
questions,
I
Paula, as
am
well.
on G.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, with so many pieces of paper, if this is, I'm looking at item 2G and it's attachment 2, it's the HR data. And I think it's really important that our board understands the HR data here, and particularly what page 70 and page 80, that the employee head count, where there's 413 management, and there are 200 on page 71, 253 management hires that have less than 5 years. So when you put those two things together, and correct me if I'm wrong, but over half of those in management have less than 5 years in the corporation. That's what I'm seeing here. And also just the relationship of the number of managers and, well, non-union, those are people that are using, confidential, that have access to confidential materials, so they are excluded from the union. But that is a very, very high complement for management, I believe, versus larger staff complement or non-management complement. So I just would like to understand where this should go, if it should go to have a further review, if this should be at the GR, I can never say it, the GREC, I'll call it the GREC committee. That's your committee, Brian. And there's other things in here I know that we're interested in. But I think those are really big picture pieces, Mr. Chair, that I'm not sure it is something the board should be interested in. So I'd take your direction on how to understand that, keep that as part of our thinking.
So are you wanting to, I guess I'm hearing two things. One, you want to understand what the information is, and then secondly, the implications of what that information tells us about staffing,
Yeah.
ratios, et cetera, in
Yes.
our corporation. And
to keep it, as we know, we just are going to be having a report that shows the structure of TCHC as a social housing landlord with other comparators. So this is one of those comparators, but I
Right.
would like to actually have this be, now that we have it, and I want to thank staff for that, it's part of a budget discussion, part of operation discussion, part of everything. So
I
maybe
think and maybe this is a suggestion, but I mean, obviously we're reorganizing in the middle of and implementing a reorganization, obviously. And I'm wondering whether as part of that, an assessment of the HR implementation issues and balance that's probably an appropriate place to assess the human resource strategy in the context of the reorg. And maybe, so do we have a reorg status report or something coming up?
So, Mr. Chair, I believe the report that we spoke about earlier, the analysis of TCHC delivery model, staffing, resources required to deliver services versus other social housing providers could answer a piece of that.
And we put that as a, and where did we put that? I can't remember.
We
asked that to have a
Status report.
check-in
Yeah, we're having a
status
having
report
that.
on that. Yeah.
yeah.
before 2022. Yes,
Yeah,
that
so
could go-
maybe, yeah,
I'd
so
like to
maybe we
refer
could, yeah,
that there. Yeah.
yeah.
And also, we have a new CEO, so I think this is an important piece of information as well
Yeah.
for the new CEO.
Yeah,
and
so I think it's
one-
probably, yeah, so if I can, Paul, maybe the thing
Yeah.
to do is to suggest it kind of feed into that status report and the comparator study, and we get a status report. And how, and as part of that, this issue addressed, is that okay, Sheila? Does that make sense to you and Paula?
Yes, it does.
And so I don't know if, I'm not sure, July might be a bit fast for that, but maybe what's our next one after that, September?
September 2nd.
So is that, maybe we can have that at that agenda, at that meeting?
Yes, I think I'd appreciate that, because when
Okay.
I'm looking at the two charts, there has been an incredible hiring in the management side over 5 years,
Right.
and not that big of a, and the non-union doesn't really follow suit. But, and then the turnover. So these are pretty critical things I think this is really a really critical thing for the board to have. And I know this is following up on GRC. So this information was following up on a GRC request. I would kind of like to leave this as well at the GRC, that it's nested in there as a foundation document, Mr. Chair, that we have that. Doesn't just go in the ether as a follow-up.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I mean, obviously, human resources expenditure is a crucial component of our budget too, so. So that's fine, so, this was an information item anyway, I believe, wasn't it, Dara?
It was.
But-
So I think what we're doing then is we receive it for information, but we'd like to refer it to GC. But I guess we want to refer it or have it come back to the board as part of the review of the status report on its comparator.
Have it come back to the board.
So I've drafted what I think is a motion that captures some of the sentiment. It's recommended the Board of Directors direct management to refer matters arising from the report to the board meeting in September through GCHRC to be considered as part of the report to the board on the comparison.
Looks pretty good to
between
me.
TCHC's operations and the operations of other comparable housing providers.
Can I just make a point, a governance point, please, Tim? Thank you.
Yeah,
So this was coming from the GRIC committee asking for more information. And it has now been sent as information to the board to receive it for information. So we'd asked very clearly the total number of management, non-exempt staff and everything else as an update. But there's information here that we didn't have at the GRC. So just, I think that maybe I'm wrong, but in general, when the committee's asked for that, it's important information. It shouldn't just be here as an information report to the board. It needs to go back to the requesting committee, which would be the GRIC committee. We're not doing that here. We're sending it back to the board, but just as a matter of course, I think that should have been acknowledged that it was, I don't know whether it should have come to the board or gone back to the GRIC. Whatever, Dara, I'm going to leave that up to you, but I think everybody understands my point, is that this big information buried in a big agenda where it's very specifically asked for by committee for deliberations. That's it. Thank you.
Dara, it's Brian. I think that it is going to be on our agenda of June the 29th. Is that not correct?
isn't it already on your agenda? So this was a double.
Yeah.
So I think, Paula, to your point, it is coming to GRIC.
Okay, it's coming to GRIC. All right. Do you mind if I call it GRIC, Brian? I just have to get your permission.
I prefer great. It's,
Great, right?
Okay, so I think we had a
Oh,
Tim, I have
Anna,
a quick
suggested
question.
motion. Yeah, sorry, Anna.
I'm sorry, I just have it's a bit of a detailed question, but I'm just very curious. On page 73, there's the recruitment activity for Q1 of 2021. And there's 30 positions that were recruited for development. Can you explain a little bit more on what kind of activity happened that required us to get 30 people in our development team recruited?
Is Vincent on the line?
Yep, so I can respond to that.
Can't hear you. Sorry, they can't hear you, Vincent.
Sorry, I'm just putting in my headset there. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Much better.
Okay, great. So, I mean, Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just total activity that we've requested of HR to support us in recruitment. These aren't net new positions. So these are all the requisitions that we've submitted. So these could be staff that have left their positions and we've had to backfill those positions, or or some of the, we've had a lot of unionized positions turnover over the past year. So that's all the active recruitments that we've done.
I understand that, Vincent, but I was expecting that it was a lot of replacement, but I mean, that's half of the department. So we had a turnover of half of the department in the first 3 months of this year.
So we had a lot of vacancies in the community revitalization engagement team under the community revitalization assistant positions. Those are the local 79 unionized staff positions that had a lot of vacancies that were carried over from 2020. And so we were actively under recruitment for 2021 in the beginning of the year.
And if I could add to that, this would also include backfilling of temporary and acting assignments. So if you fill positions within the division, you fill a more senior level position and that leaves a hole at a more junior level, then you have additional recruitment activity to backfill. So it could reflect a lot of movement within the division itself. And it is a combination of both filling both temporary and permanent assignments.
Okay, those were my questions.
I just have a follow-up then, please, for that. Because I think there's 66 people in that department and 30 with a changeover of some kind. So what are anyway. And then I think maybe at the GRC, at the GREC, we'll dive a little bit more into that. I'll just flag that as to which revites are being supported. Which ones that are finished are still being supported, where the staff are, if these are development positions or tenant side, there's a bar dealing with tenants or dealing with the developer. And we could do that. Also, just to flag that the Planning and Housing Committee may go into a second day, which is June 29th. Where are you, Deputy Mayor? Up there. Have you set that day aside? I'm sorry to do this right here.
We set it up aside starting at 1:30 because most
1:30, okay. We should be okay in the morning. So this will be on the agenda. We'll dive into that a bit deeper at committee. Thank you. And now you know we're going to dive, so you can get your breathing apparatus.
Tim? Tim?
Sorry, I was on mute. Go ahead, John.
Sorry. So will we see a similar profile for Q2? Because this is about 200 people, a little over 200 people, which is close to, is that almost 9% of the workforce? Do we have, how many people? Do we have 2,300 people at TCHC, or how many employees do we have?
2,300.
So this is something in the neighborhood of 8 or 9% of the staffing. Would we see a similar profile in the second quarter?
Yes, certainly I can bring forward a report on Q2 activity.
I'm wondering if there's,
Do
sorry,
you
I'm wondering.
think, sorry,
Go
do you
ahead.
think, do you think it's similar? Do you think that there's been a similar level of
oh,
activity? That's all I
I'm
mean.
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have that information immediately available. I can certainly get it for you. I don't know the numbers offhand.
Okay, I was just wondering if you had a sense as to whether or not it was considerable.
But I do think it's worth having as information. How many of them are new recruits? How many are permanent? How many are temporary? Like the things you identified, I think divvying it up in that way might provide a more accurate picture of whether it's we're growing, replacing, shrinking, because I think this just reports, a generic recruitment, which sounds like it includes, if someone gets promoted upstairs and you fill in the spot they left
Correct.
from inside the department, that gets counted as a recruitment. So I think so I think it's worth being accurate. I mean, it may still be something we need to dig into, but I think if you could have a little more clarity for the board or I guess frankly, Grick, around that issue, I think it'd be helpful to frame the discussion.
Thank you,
Sure,
Tim. And
definitely.
if I could be clearer on, there are development side and the tenant related side, very clear as to there's construction managers, there's development people, and then there's the community revitalization people that work exclusively with tenants, relocation, tenant development, that. What's the dividing line in that division of 66 from one component to the other? And then how is this 30 related to both of those? Or there's three functions: construction management, development, and tenant engagement. How does that work there, Barbara? That would be helpful. So you know what we're looking for. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so
Thank
do we
you.
have a
motion.
Do we get a mover and seconder for your motion?
Sorry, and
Brian?
sorry, Tim, I misspoke earlier. Our next board meeting after July is October rather than September.
October what?
October 7th.
Yeah, okay, so I think July is just too early, so it'll have to be the next one.
Well, there
And
might be something on the board July meeting from committee as well that keeps this moving along, Tim.
Maybe, yeah, but I also think if we're lucky that we'll have a new CEO, may have some time to be able to dig into this and be able to have some, and that won't happen in July.
Right.
Okay, so do we get a mover? To the extent people are happy with the motion, that they probably have to put it back up.
Sorry.
So does that work for you, Paula?
Yes.
Okay, do you want to move that then?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep.
Thanks, Paula. Seconded by Councilor Nunziata. All those in favor? Passed. I think, was H another one? Yes, it was.
No, we held H because we had
We have a
deputant.
Okay.
So the deputant is Kathy Kunzman, who I believe is on the line. Ms. Kunzman had asked to depute to a number of different items on the board agenda today. We would suggest that the board might want to consider asking Ms. Kunzman to depute on all of those items at the same time, just to avoid her having to jump in and out of the meeting. Ms. Kunzman, are you there?
Yes.
So yeah,
I
so
thought,
I don't.
I thought that we were. I thought they had mentioned something about that the deputants would be coming on later.
No, we're at the agenda item for the item that one of the items that you've asked to depute to, and I just think for efficiency's sake, rather than jumping in and out, it would be appropriate to ask you to speak now to all the items you were interested in deputing to, so that we could deal with them efficiently.
What was that first item that they've got me up for?
The city council directions requiring board direction, I believe.
Correct.
Because there was the discussion about the Toronto Community Housing moratorium on evictions that was coming up later on in the agenda.
So do you have nothing on 2H then? Would you prefer to speak? Was 2J one of the items that you listed to speak to?
Yeah, well, I did, but like, it was explained to me that there's the option of speaking on each item or altogether.
Well, there's not an option. We're asking you to speak now to all of your items, so please proceed.
They're kind of the same topic.
Yeah, so that's great. So dig right in.
Yeah, well, I'm saying that I can speak when the issue comes up because that way I can have my questions answered when there's discussion on it about the moratorium.
Sure. So speak to the moratorium now.
It's right there. It's ahead of in front of us now.
Yeah,
I
it's
think.
just it's.
I just don't. But what I'm saying is that there's nobody else talking
You're
about
using-
it yet. You know.
Yeah, it's fine. You're the only person. We're ready to hear you. So please
Okay.
proceed.
Well, all right. I don't know why they want me to talk if nobody's talking about it, but anyway. The moratorium is set to be lifted, as people know. There's going to be a lockdown liftoff as of June the 17th, coming up in a couple of days. And nobody seems to be aware of this because I've asked around, and social services said they didn't know. And so there's 25 people out of over 160,000 tenants in Toronto community housing, which is a drop in the bucket. Now to get into the ouch, which is also part of this, what I put on my list, they claim to be helping those people not be evicted. However, every time I call them, I haven't been able to get through to anyone at all, and I'm set to be one of those 25 people to be evicted. Yet they do not return any of my calls. I can't get through. At the last board of directors meeting on December the 15th, they said that someone would be contacting me. But when I called in later that afternoon, they just said that I didn't qualify and there's nothing they can do to help me at all. And they still won't help me. So I'm just wondering what they're going to do for the other 25 people that are being evicted, because I would suggest, and I'd like people to tell me what they think. My question I'm posing to the board of directors is that the moratorium continue for those, for another 3 months, because it's only 25 people. That's a very tiny amount, tiny fraction compared to the number, considering it's a huge city, and those people could be contributing to the COVID crisis. Also, I just got off the phone when I entered the meeting with a worker from social services, Anne Ratchet. She contacted my property management to find out if there's anything she could do about paying any arrears. And I was glad to find out that there is no arrear. Yet they claim that there's a sheriff that's coming and that they've paid his fee, and that the sheriff only comes if you owe money. So I can't get a copy of my bills. I was hoping that's what I asked Ouch, if they could help me at least get a copy of the bill, because I suspect this is an easy method they use to evict people. And some of those 25 people are probably going to be evicted before anything can be done, because Anne said there's lots of people that would help those people, but they'd like to know who they are. I don't even have any idea who they are, but I would be willing, because I started a meeting of to try to do something myself to prevent evictions, having been tenant rep for a long time, St. Jamestown Anti-Eviction Committee, because they have an eviction committee there that is very active. But there is in the pandemic, but there's been nothing done to deal with the pandemic, the problem of the pandemic, other than the entire lockdown. That's not done by Toronto Housing. So is there any way that they could even just forward my email so that those people, I could get in touch with them, and the people at social services, my caseworker said she would be helping too. There's people I've been trying to hook up with those people, but there's no way to find them, and I can't even get any response from Ouch themselves. So if the person from Ouch would answer why they promised me at the last meeting that they would be getting a hold of me, yet nobody ever does, and that means that I could still be evicted for all I know, because that's what they're telling me, that I'm going to be evicted, and even though there's no arrears, that they're going to, in case people think that it's not a serious issue, I have people coming to my door saying that they have to get in here to do construction, even though there's nothing wrong with my unit. And I've been tipped off it's like has to do with renovictions, that they're going to try to use that angle, do a renovation, and that I have to leave the premises. And the lease that I thought was in my name, they took one end off the name and of Kunzman, and my lawyer said that that is not legal. It's not my lease is not in my legal name, and it seems like this Greenland will stop at nothing to continue an eviction process. And like I think Paula Fletcher was mentioning something about more details about the those jobs. Those are the jobs that I think she's speaking of. They're doing evictions because the management. It just makes it easy for the management, is what they told me. The management wants it that way so that they don't have to do any of these evictions. They just make them evict people, and they don't even know if they will be on the list as well. So I'd like if it's possible to answer the questions, because I can't get any answers to any of this. And I'm worried about the people are going to be evicted.
You've been 5 minutes. We've been 5 minutes. So are there any... I'll start with, are there any directors that have any questions or comments for Ms. Gunsman?
I'd like some answers. You know, are you going to evict those 25 people, or are you going to do something to help them? To not be evicted into a pandemic, like that's not.
Hang on a sec. You've had your 5 minutes. Thank you. And as you can well imagine, we don't discuss particulars of individual tenants on what is a public forum. So be careful. You can obviously tell your own story, but
there's 25.
No, hang on, please.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
John.
It might be worth just explaining to the deputant that it's not a deputation is not a question and answer session. They're allowed to voice their opinions. The board.
There's no answers.
No, but this is not a question and answer session. So we've heard you, and staff has heard you and taken their notes, and now it's the job of staff to get back to you, and we have heard you and we understand your predicament, and it's our job to give direction to staff to respond accordingly.
So thank you.
If I could, we will have staff follow up directly with Ms. Kunzman. Ms. Kunzman, it's Sheila Penny. I'm the acting CEO, and I'll make sure you're...
I left a message. Yeah, things are not working out because my name has been changed, and there's no... can't get a copy of any of my records. Just keeps going.
Okay, well, I think we've got your... I think we have your contact info by virtue of your connecting with the board for this purpose. So you heard, I mean, Ms. Penny on public record here. We'll ensure that you are got in touch with. So thank you for your deputation. I appreciate it. And thank you. Do we have any other deputations on items in this section, Dara?
No, we don't.
Okay. So what did we have? We held H and J, yes. So any director comments, questions relating to H and J? I guess they're both, are they both receipt for information items? Yeah.
They are.
Okay. Councilor Nunziata, I assume you're moving. Seconded by Adele. All those in favor? Thank you. All right. Any business arising? Councilor Nunziata.
So business arising on item 4 that came to committee in December 2020, the provision of internet access to all Tchc households. So what's the status of that? Do we know what the status is?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we will have a report at the November 18th Tdsb meeting, and we are moving ahead to put a plan together, a pilot for common area internet access and in-suite internet access. We're working through the what it's going to take to get us there, and we'll be reporting out to Tsb in November.
Okay, so the report that's coming forward in November would be your recommendation, but you are working on implementing, correct? Or you're coming forward with a cost in November?
We're coming forward with the plan to implement.
Okay, okay.
The only,
I
sorry,
just-
Councillor, the only piece I wanted to add to it is the other piece that we are engaged in is we've sought advice of outside counsel just to make sure that from a regulatory perspective, telecommunications is a federally regulated activity. We need to ensure that any activity that we get into in this area is done in a manner that's consistent with federal regulations. So we've had outside counsel provide us with advice in that regard.
So the deputation that was made in 2020, the report and the stats on that will be used as part of your report, correct, Sheila?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other business arising? Okay. Okay, I guess, do I need a motion on that one?
I've got a motion for the board's consideration up.
Yeah, receive updates on business arising. Moved by Brian, seconded by Adele. All those in favor? Carried. Item 4.
Mr. Chair, with us today, we have Abby Bond from the City of Toronto. She is the Housing Secretariat. I'll make a couple of opening comments and then ask Housing Secretariat if she has anything to add. What's in front of the board today is a recommendation that the board approve lease agreement with the City of Toronto for construction, operation, maintenance, and management of 3 modular housing developments on 3 TCHC sites. This is a direction that we have received from our shareholder to negotiate and execute these leases, and that there be no delay in entering into the leases, given that this is part of a city program to increase affordable supportive housing stock. It's outlined in the Housing TO 2020 to 2030 action plan. It's part of the city's target of increasing our affordable rental housing stock across the city over the next 10 years by 40,000 units. 18,000 of those are planned to be supportive. So Abby Bond has led a team in the city. We have worked very closely with the Housing Secretariat to identify these 3 sites. 175 Cummer, where a 3-story building is proposed, 59 units. 75 Cambridge, a 5-story building with 113 units. 7 Glamorgan, a 5-story building with 57 units. The city and the Housing Secretariat have engaged with tenant consultation on the 3 sites. They have some very tight timelines to get this housing up and in service, and we are working with them to meet those timelines. At a high level, the terms of the lease, 50 years less a day, rent $1 a month, provided that the city and its third-party nonprofit operator pay all taxes, charges, insurance, construction, operating, maintenance, capital, and non-capital repair costs. So these supportive housing modular structures will be maintained, operated, tenanted through the City of Toronto. The detail of the lease agreement, the principal terms are contained in your report. They start on page 10. The major terms that I just outlined are pretty broad strokes, but basically speak to the fact that the city will be building, maintaining, and operating these structures over the term of the lease. We are still engaged with the Housing Secretariat on setting out what will occur at the end of the 50-year lease with the property and tenancy. We are taking a little bit of time to make sure we get that right. But apart from that, we have signed off at a staff level and agreed to all other terms and conditions. And with that, I'll hand it over to the Housing Secretariat to make any additional comments.
Thanks very much, Sheila, and good morning to the board and the chair. It's great to be here this morning to support the TCHC staff with this report to you. The partnership that we've been working on with TCHC staff and the city staff has been remarkable in the way that we've been able to move these sites forward so quickly. We're in consultation right now for all sites and moving ahead with the Cummer site now, just awaiting final confirmation of the request we made for our ministerial zoning order, but moving full steam ahead to try and get that site ready and occupied by the end of the year. So we've been really pleased to see the cooperation that we've had from the staff. And as Sheila said, our desire to get as many of these units kind of occupied and finished as soon as possible, as we've been able to take advantage of the Rapid Housing Initiative from the federal government, and we anticipate another round of that. So we're looking to have success with this round so that we can further leverage this partnership potentially for other future sites in the future. So with that, just a thank you to everyone as we continue to work on this, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the board. Thank you.
Adele. You might be on mute, Adele.
Sorry, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah.
I just had a couple of questions on 75 Tandridge. It talks about relocating a parking and basketball court and a playground. And I just wondered, is that TCH's responsibility to do that? Is there room on the site to relocate it? And what the timeline is for doing something like that?
Thank you.
It's on page 109.
Sheila, did you want to speak first, or?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we've been in consultation with TCHC about the possible relocation of the basketball court and the play area to accommodate the new building. We've actually also doing some further site due diligence on the Tanridge site. We were anticipating doing some further consultation with community and the tenants about that relocation in June, and we've actually moved that back till September. So we have some more time right now because of the other due diligence that we're doing, and we'll be coming back to TCHC and also the tenants to do further consultation on the relocation of the basketball court and the play area.
And Abby, those costs will be borne by the city. Those relocation
correct.
costs. And as we put together the plan to relocate them, we'll engage with tenants.
Yes.
In the diagram that we got for 75 Tandridge, it looks like the portion that's being leased is larger. It looks like there's open space that's being leased. Is that correct? As opposed to just what's around the building. I'll see if I can find and I just wondered if the tenants, the TCHC tenants, it's on page 119. I just wondered if the TCHC tenants, pardon?
What will be leased is the area under the building.
So it's just the area, not the black.
Correct. We haven't yet determined exactly where the structure will go because we're still working through shifting the basketball court. So it's not that's the total site area. the site that is leased will be a small piece of that, directly under the building.
Okay, so that wasn't clear to me, and so I was concerned about our tenants having access to that space. Okay, thank you.
I saw Paula had her hand up. You're on mute, Paula.
Just wondering what kind of work has been undertaken with the tenant communities in these 3 areas to advise them, to have people understand what's going on, so there's no surprises. I was a little taken aback on the public meeting for the 1631 Housing Now plan for Queen Street East, when tenants from the seniors building, Tchc 1080 Eastern, came on and were saying, why do we need to do that? We don't want this. So I was concerned that there had been no pre-work done for the importance of affordable housing with our own tenants. So I'd like to understand exactly what has been done in those areas, please.
And I will ask Abby to respond to that.
Yes, thank you. So for these 3 sites, we've done direct, in addition to the public engagement, we've done direct engagement with the tenants. So each of the buildings received dual notifications. So there was a postcard that went to everyone in the building, as well as a fact sheet. And for each of these buildings, we've also held tenant specific meetings. So we've convened discussions with tenant leaders and held separate meetings with the tenants outside of the regular public engagement sessions. So there have been multiple opportunities for us to talk directly to the tenants affected for these 3 buildings.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions?
I guess we don't do that for the other sites then. We haven't done that for any Housing Now sites.
So my only question, just what the end of lease issue, Sheila, if you could describe what that's about.
So we, the lease is long, 50 years less a day, and our recommendation to Abby and her team is that at year 45, the parties that have responsibility at the city and at Toronto Community Housing sit down and look at the condition of the building, the state of the tenancies, make a plan for whether or not TCH would assume the building and the tenancies, or whether TCH at that time would require vacant possession of the land. That there be a 2-year period for that discussion to be resolved. If it can't be resolved by year 47, that we would move that discussion to arbitration. And the reason that your staff team are recommending that is that 47 years, 45 years out from now is a long period of time, and there will be different players involved at that time, and we thought it would be prudent to build into the agreement that pardon me, that term.
And the reason
are there any conditions on the handback of the quality of the handback of the asset if we take it?
So that we will assume that we are not taking back an asset that is not in good.
Right. So that's one of the criteria for that negotiation discussion.
Yeah.
Adele will know there are contracts that set out a process for the handback quality of an asset.
The reason we're raising that with the board now is that the recommendations in the report would authorize staff to make these leases without on terms that are acceptable to general counsel. So the board would then authorize us to go away and make these deals. We just want to make sure that any step that we take in that regard is steps that the board approves of.
Yeah. So I think you're hearing the perspective that the board will want to make sure from its fiduciary perspective that the financial interests of the corporation are protected in that. And it sounds like on an ongoing but obviously also in the handback context.
Great.
Any other comments, Brian? You're on mute, Brian.
Sorry. Just would like to know the process of selecting the nonprofit that would manage the building.
Abby?
Yes.
Is it RFP?
Can you hear me okay? Just I was having some.
Yes.
So we'll be issuing RFP for operators. And so for these sites, we'll obviously make sure that we reference the adjacency of the TCHC units and likely have TCHC staff supporting us in that process. But we'll be issuing a competitive process for all of the sites, looking for the operators with the right track record and the expertise that we want, or that are delivering supportive housing elsewhere, and that will make these buildings a success.
I just wanted to make sure you have organizations that have good experience in providing supportive housing.
Yes, absolutely. It's a critical part of our plan that we have nonprofit organizations that have a strong track record at looking after buildings like this, and also supporting tenants and working with adjacent stakeholders and community as well.
Councillor Bailao.
Abby, so when you do that RFP, you're also going to be taking in consideration any needs that the existing TCHC communities around some of these homes might have, and for possible partnerships. Is that correct?
Yeah, through the RFP does give us an opportunity to create linkages and connections between adjacent buildings, and so that we're looking for organizations that have a desire to do that and a track record of building some of those stakeholder links. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, so do I have a mover to approve the recommendations? Brian? Seconded by somebody.
I'll second.
Thanks, Debbie. All those in favor? Motion carried. Excellent. I think we're now on CABR strategy implementation.
I just want to thank staff and the board. I mean, this is as a really important program for the city and for the federal government that has been supporting us on the rapid rehousing program. And so I just want to thank everybody for their collaboration and work on this.
Great, thank you. Noted. All right, item 5, I think that's you, Sheila.
It is, and I believe that we have a deputation on this matter.
We do. Muna Mohammed has asked to speak to this matter. Ms. Mohammed, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So I've been watching and following the development of the CABR strategy at TCHC, and was surprised to see at the last board meeting that the resourcing of the strategy has been put into question, especially considering that it was unanimously passed. I'm here because I'm concerned about the type of questions being asked of the strategy, and worry that the strategy will not be set up to have the intended impact. I understand that the board is doing its job, but we must work in a way that does not perpetrate anti-Black racism and its impact. Even if you think that this is not anti-Black, the repercussions of not resourcing the strategy will be anti-Black. Please listen to the experts. What we have from the CABR strategy, the Point 8 plan, and the investment in the center is an opportunity for change to come directly into the homes of the Black lives in the city. It is important for the strategy to be fully resourced so it can change lives. As the largest social housing provider in this country, TCSC has the unique influence in being able to tangibly change the outcomes of Black people in Toronto. There is no other organization that directly influences the homes, families, and livelihoods of so many Black people in the city. Because of that, there is no better positioned organization to live up to the vision that Black people see for themselves and their community when it comes to directly addressing some of the systemic issues caused by the anti-Black racism. We know that anti-Black racism work has historically been underfunded and under-resourced in the past. The Black community has the Black community is highly skeptical of anti-Black racism work that operates from a model of not having the resources needed to make the impact for our community that is identified as being critical. TCHC is not investing in a small program or a one-time initiative to follow a trend. It is investing in a systemic change in the lives of tens and thousands of Black Torontonians. The harms that not fully resourcing the CABR strategy would cause are clearly identified within the strategy itself. We know what anti-Black racism has already done and what it continues to do. We know that the anti-Black racism is systemic and entrenched into our systems and society. We know that TCHC and its tenants and staffs are directly impacted by this racism day in and day out. The recommendation for this center came from Black tenants and staff directly. We know that in order to create the change that we asked for, we need to see something that has the capacity to lead real change within TCHC. We need something that functions as a central hub because our problems, our solutions are deeply interconnected and cannot be addressed in a non-strategic, disjointed, and underfunded way. We can't be making decisions about the community's safety that are divorced from decisions about mental health or economic well-being. We can't have the conversation with only a handful of staff in one part of the organization and be disconnected from other staff and the decision makers who work directly impact our quality of life and who can address the anti-Black racism by including that lens into their work. The tenants need to know that the CABR strategy can have an impact and be sustainable. The center is the right systemic response to a systemic issue. And we shouldn't be comparing the work that TCHC needs to do with other organizations when the context just isn't the same. The City of Toronto CABR unit doesn't do work that impacts the lives of Torontonians directly. Community doesn't know that it exists, and they don't understand the work that they do. Black people in the city need an approach to anti-Black racism that changes the reality of the experience on the ground. And TCHC is strongly positioned to be able to do that. I personally use my own connections and trust that I built within my community to host sessions for the developing of the CABR strategy. I got people to come out and trust TCHC in this position to show up for Black people. A huge part of which includes the belief of TCHC is going to properly invest in the necessary financial resources in the CABR strategy. TCHC has put their money where their mouth is when it comes to showing up for Black people. Or else we're going to end up repeating many of the same mistakes that we've caused community initiatives to fail. What ends up happening is that the labor of this place is placed on the backs of Black women who tend to lead these kind of initiatives, and they end up burnt out since they are under-resourced and under-supported. We have a chance now to make a social return on the investment to see real social changes caused by a critical investment at a critical time. We see many organizations take a stance against anti-Black racism, but we fail to see the majority of those organizations take the steps necessary to actually confront and combat the racism by investing into the work. A serious question that needs to be asked. Sorry,
your time's up. If you want to finish your last thought, and then we'll conclude.
Perfect. Okay. So a serious question that needs to be asked is that is the board willing to take the responsibility for the failing of the strategy that they did not adequately resource? Are we ready to accept the strategy failing?
Okay. So thank you. So do any directors have any questions or comments for the deputy? Yeah, John. You're on mute, John.
Sorry, the deputant's name is Muna?
That's correct.
Right. And Muna, you're a tenant of TCHC. How long have you been a tenant?
I've been a tenant my whole life.
Your whole life. And you said you were somehow involved with getting people together and helping with the strategy?
Yes, over last summer I did work. I was able to facilitate some workshops in the fall to meet with other tenants to discuss what the
how did you facilitate the workshops?
I was contacted by some of the workers of THC that were hired for the anti-systemic racism approach, and I gathered people that I already knew in my community and had a meeting in Scarlet Woods, one of the rec rooms there.
So if it's properly resourced and up and running, how would you view, what would success look like to you? I mean, that was a very good prepared statement, and you spent time writing it. I can and you know, thinking it through, but sort of in regular terms, how would you see success?
So having a facility where Black people could meet and gather and be able to confront and have workers be able to advocate on their behalf, and having a facility that has more than enough workers to be able to address these needs.
I'm sorry, I maybe wasn't clear. If it's properly resourced and it's up and running and it's working properly for a year or 2 years, how would success look to you in terms of actual outcomes?
So there would be less incidents of anti-Black racism in housing.
Okay, and I mean, can you elaborate on that? I mean, I could appreciate. I mean, I read some, I get the gist of it, but can you just be a little bit more specific in how it would affect you or some of your friends?
So economic growth for the tenants that are there. Community safety, economic growth for some of these tenants. That's what it would look like for me.
Okay. They talked about in the healing, it was at the Healing Center's document, it talked about microaggressions. Is that something that you've experienced?
From racist workers, yes, of course.
Okay. All right, that's all my questions, Mr. Chair.
Great, thanks, John. Yeah, Debbie?
Thank you for your deputation. I'm assuming that you've taken a look at the plan. At the core of the plan is a wheel and spoke model. You have the center at the center of this, and then you have staff who will be working with the various departments of TCHC. Do you think that's practical, and will it have an impact on changes within the corporation?
I'm sorry, you broke up in the middle of that. Could you actually repeat the question?
Yes. At the core of the plan is a center with a number of staff people, and they will be responsible for working with specific departments within TCHC. Is that an appropriate, probably appropriate is not the right word, is that is that process or is that plan one that will have impact in making the kinds of changes that you're looking for?
Yes, I do believe that. I believe that we do need every employer, every department to have an anti-Black lens in order for this program to thrive.
And you believe that what is being presented here will allow that to happen?
Sorry, what did you say?
And you believe that what is being presented here in terms of having policy staff, research assistants working with the various departments will bring about that change?
Absolutely, yes.
What are some challenges you anticipate moving forward?
Under-resourcing. Having this plan being proposed and not having enough staff or resources in order for it to actually thrive or go somewhere within the community to see change.
The Black community members you spoke to, what was the general response to this plan and the process that was undertaken?
It was unanimous. Everybody that was there were thinking that they needed a hub, a unit like this, in order for a program that would be there for support, somebody to support and have advocates for the anti-racism approach or strategy, sorry.
And I'm sorry, Muna, you may have answered this at other times when you presented. In what areas were the focus groups held?
Was the what fulfilled, sorry?
In what?
Oh, I
In
think
what
Debbie,
area were the focus groups held that you facilitated?
Scarlet Wood Courts and James Finch.
Thanks for your deputation, Mona.
any other questions or comments for the deputant? Thank you very much, Manav. Appreciate your participating with us here today and your input. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Sheila, I'm going to think over to you to review with us. I think we're back the second time, so this is in response to some questions from the board the last time, so over to you.
Right, and we could go to the first slide, Danielle. So just to refresh everyone's memory, our shareholder did adopt an action plan to confront anti-Black racism in December 2017. They received a 2-year update on that action plan on the 25th and 26th of 20. Also in November of 20, we provided the board with an update on its efforts to develop and implement a confronting anti-Black racism strategy and the work to undertake that strategy. And we were asked to come back to you today and bring forward for your approval a work plan, a budget, and a staffing model. So we are here today to present those 3 items based on the CABR strategy that was unanimously approved by the board back in February. I just want to take a minute and point out that the strategy that you approved in February was incredibly well received by the over 600 tenants that were part of the engagement efforts, as well as 150 employees who contributed to the development of that strategy. We began the development of the strategy. You've heard reference to healing circles where we had over 100 employees attend. And what you see in the strategy and in the work that we're bringing forward today is lived experiences that were shared by our staff and tenants. So that is what we are responding to. I want to thank the board for their interest in the CABR strategy. Your interest has helped us further refine the work and this new area of focus for TCH. I want to point out that we are bringing this strategy forward to address real issues that exist every day for our staff and tenants. I had an opportunity to reach out to a few board members prior to today. I understand that you are concerned about the staff complement of 15.5, the overall budget of just under 2.2 million. And I will tell you that we will use those dollars to very great effect to pull people in, pull FTE in from the regions, pull those FTE into the center, train those individuals, and then return those individuals back out into the center. And the reason that we're proposing this strategy is so that our center doesn't exist as an isolated entity writing policy. We need to get the policies written, but we need to get the actions out into the field to be implemented on the ground in the best place for them to actually improve the quality of life for our Black tenants and the work experience for our staff. Danielle, if you can move to the next slide. So the center mandate is clear. is to drive tenant satisfaction and staff engagement by embedding anti-Black racism analysis into the culture of our company and into the day-to-day operations. We will achieve that mandate through 4 key areas: through impacting service delivery on the ground, influencing through research, analysis, and policy, strategic and sustained relationship buildings among diverse groups, and instituting true organizational change. You rightly asked, how will we know that we've been successful? And we will do that by measuring tenant satisfaction. And I want to point out a key fact for the board, that in 2018, we administered a tenant satisfaction survey to a sample of households across TCH. Overall, tenants reflected satisfaction as high as 78% for service, with our Black tenants who self-identify showing satisfaction in service experience at 58%. So that's a very significant swing in the last tenant satisfaction survey that we rolled out. So as we implement the plan, we will continue to measure tenant satisfaction and hopefully see that statistic come way up. We'll also measure how well we're doing at implementing our anti-Black racism strategy through the service quality indicators at a building level. The transition team in the center now is mapping where our racialized communities exist based on data that they have from the city at a high level, and we'll be refining this as we go forward. But at a high level, they're identifying which of our hubs, which of our communities have a high racialized demographic, and we'll be comparing our service quality indicators, our tenant satisfaction results in those communities to ensure that as the strategy rolls out, that we are in fact making a difference. And at a staff level, we will embed CABR competencies into our performance management plan. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Evelyn Aponza, who came to us from the city's Center for Confronting Anti-Black Racism. We were fortunate to have Evelyn join our team, and Evelyn, working with Nadia Gobaya, who you'll also hear a little bit later in the presentation, have been instrumental in putting this strategy together. So with that, Evelyn, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sheila. So I'm just going to speak a bit to the center's approach. The center positions TCHC to execute the CABR strategy by creating a space whose primary business function is confronting anti-Black racism. And so while the center is primary business function is to confront anti-Black racism, it's also important that an ABR expertise is embedded within other divisions and other teams. And so to do this, what we've conceptualized is having 10 FTEs who are initially located in the center, but will be transferred to the respective business units, but will remain anchored to the center's core team. So by locating these positions in the center initially, we're going to be recruiting for an anti-Black racism expertise. And this expertise is going to be developed in tandem with TCHC business functions. That's the kind of experience I actually went through. I came into TCHC with an anti-Black racism expertise, but then I learned the functions of TCHC. I learned what it meant to apply that lens in a social housing context, which then allowed me to support the various teams that exist in TCHC. And so the positions are designed in a very intentional way to support a TCHC specific function and will embed CABR into the sinews of TCHC. This approach is informed by best practices and learnings from other ABR initiatives and including a TCHC specific context and needs. One of the most similar models that we modeled this approach after is the Center for Black Excellence for Students at the Tdsb. It's the first of its kind in public education, and it's a response to the voices of the Black communities who advocated for deeper systemic change within the Tdsb. There are a few other initiatives that exist that are similar coming up in various places, including OCAD University, the City of Toronto, Concordia University, and also One Vision, One Voice, which was funded by the Ministry of Children's Services and supported the Children Aid Societies, specifically targeting the overrepresentation of Black families within the care system. And so what we're seeing in the sector is more initiatives that are moving towards creating spaces whose primary function is to support Black populations. However, one of the pitfalls is that sometimes this work stays located in one place with one team. Our model is trying to account for this pitfall by ensuring that staff, the initial staff in the center will move out into TCHC and ensure that the CABR work or the anti-Black racism analysis is not put on is not seen as only one team's responsibility, but seen as integral to the overall organization and how we do our work. Danielle, can you go on to the next slide, please? So I want to speak to some of the issues we've been seeing from tenants. We've been getting, 3 to 5, sometimes more complex ABR issues per week escalated to our team. How this is happening is tenants are sometimes finding our phone number, my phone number, my team's phone number through referrals from other community agencies, or folks that participated within the consultations are reaching out or passing on our contact information when they are experiencing an issue. The issues that are currently being faced by tenants I categorize them in a couple of buckets. So one of the ways is tenant and tenant issues. So these are ABR, anti-Black racism issues that tenants are experiencing with other tenants and tenant disputes. And then tenant and staff issues where tenants feel like they're experiencing anti-Black racism from staff. The other piece is with our policies where tenants are experiencing our policies and our practices in a disproportionate way than other tenants are. And so those are the 3 areas that we've been really hearing from tenants. And what we've been able to do when we hear of these issues, when they are escalated to us, is triage and create solutions for the issue. We often refer the issues to different teams and then support those teams in terms of walking through those issues. An example of something that happened, that one of the issues that we were able to navigate was an escalation involving a Black trans tenant. So we were able to connect with the GM for the area and support that tenant. But one of the other things we were able to do through that process is learn how our process, the process that tenant had to go through initially was had a lot of barriers. And so in that way, we were able to learn from that situation and start being proactive around creating supports for tenants that are part of the Black queer community, Black trans community. And so now we're seeing tenants are reaching out to us because there's an understanding that, our team gets it. There's an understanding that we will be able to support them by centering how race impacts their experience. I'm going to move on, if you can go to the next slide, please, to talk about the emerging CABR issues for staff. So similarly, we're getting about 5 to 10 requests for CABR support or issues per week. Some weeks it's more than that. And internally, the buckets that exist for staff are issues between staff and staff. So staff feeling that they're facing microaggressions, anti-Black racism from other staff, staff feeling like they're facing these same issues from tenants as they're trying to deliver do their work on the ground, and staff within their work. So staff has escalated issues where they're trying to understand how the strategy really does apply to their work and how they can do their work taking into account these experiences of Black tenants. we've been able to, some of the successes that we've experienced is supporting the development and procurement teams around thinking about barriers and our processes for Black contractors. We've been also able to work with CSU, looking at the Cannabis Act and thinking about how that might disproportionately impact young Black tenants specifically. Through this conversation, we were able to review, we were able to identify gaps within the training that was going to be offered with CSU officers. And we were able to identify the need for data collection in terms of how the Cannabis Act would be implemented within our communities. On both the tenant and staff front, we're having conversations within TCHC that have not happened before. This is allowing us to do work to solve these issues and also learn and adapt our processes and our policies to be able to account for some of these changes. So these are just some examples of the progress that we're making, while also capturing some of the issues that we are getting from tenants. There's been a lot of aha moments, and this will translate to better service and experiences for Black tenants and staff. I'm going to pass the mic over to Nadia to continue the presentation.
Thanks, Evelyn. So the center will commence its work in September 2021 with a centralized model, the first turquoise square. The team will work closely with HR and communications to advance the CABR strategy work with our teams and tenants. Over time, and once divisions are in the implementation stage of most of their actions, year 2 to 3, or the white square in the center, staff functions will be returned to respective divisions. Human resources and strategic planning will absorb functions to advance the work for staff and tenants and ensure CABR and diversity principles are at the forefront of their systems and processes. Operations will take on 4 roles. 1 policy planning and coaching consultant will be in CSU, and 3 tenant and staff workshop facilitators will be placed in the regions. By having the expertise embedded in the regions, we will be able to see a demonstrable impact with tenants and staff at the front lines. Other core divisions will also receive resources to support ongoing and emerging CABR issues. The core center team of 5.5 FTEs will still play a significant role in leading and advancing the work as divisions continue to expand the impact of the CABR strategy through the newly embedded staffing resources. By year 4, the center will play more of an oversight and support function and will also tackle complex escalations. The size of the circles in this diagram represent the volume and impact of work from various divisions, as well as outlines where the staff will support. Next slide, please. This slide outlines the roles in the center. The positions will provide expertise both in anti-Black racism and in specific TCHC functions, such as strategic planning, community development, community safety, and law. The organizational chart outlines the Tenant and Staff Oversight Committee in the dark blue square that will meet quarterly to ensure the work is on track and meeting tenant and staff needs. The core team of 5.5 will be led by the center director that will lead the CABR strategy implementation and the center team. He or she will be supported by an executive assistant, a business planner, and a part-time research assistant for effective evaluation, documentation, and report writing. The final members of the team, 2 resolutions coordinators, will create a centralized space with consistent responses to ABR issues and support with system navigation to ensure staff and tenants receive the support they need. One role will focus on staff and the other on tenants. 4 policy and planning consultants will provide ongoing support, including policy revision, new policy development, and embedding a CABR lens into TCHC's day-to-day business. The staff, once moved into the divisions, will support ongoing operations, including program policy and procedural design, as well as implementation. For example, one of the staff is slated to work within CSU to support their CABR efforts. A communications coordinator will support ongoing communications to staff and tenants while maintaining transparency and accountability through public information sharing. This role will subsequently work and be embedded in our centralized communication team. The education and advocacy consultant with a team of 3 tenant and staff workshop facilitators will be responsible for leading the development of ABR training and capacity building programs, and will support the rollout of the equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy with a particular focus on the regional and hub teams. The full team is designed to address all divisions and system-wide issues, as well as provide resources to tenants and staff. Next slide, please. The center is a critical component to TCHC's delivery of the CABR strategy, because without a centralized hub, the work will lack strategic directions and develop in silos, as there is minimal institutional expertise in the area of anti-Black racism outside of the proposed structure. The center will allow for support and capacity that will be embedded throughout the company, leading to ongoing sustainable change. Through having subject matter experts focusing on specific divisions, there will be a mechanism to support ongoing ABR issues and escalations, provide peer mentoring, and support future process and policy development. The center creates the capacity, the structure, and support needed to ensure TCHC can and will be successful in delivering the CABR strategy. In the last few years as a city, we have learned so much about institutional and systemic anti-Black racism. We have also learned that to eradicate it requires a radical shift from the way we are used to doing our work. The center is a space that will drive this change by ensuring subject matter experts are leading the work and moving TCHC to a space to better support and address the needs of Black tenants and staff. Back to you, Evelyn.
Thanks. So I'm going to speak a bit to how the center is aligned with the equity and diversity initiative that's currently being developed at TCHC. And so the proposed model will work with the HR team to realize TCHC's diversity and inclusion policy and its ongoing EDI efforts. We'll ensure that the EDI work is supported by the CABR initiative, including lending center staff expertise. And so we'll ensure that the staff that are hired for the center will also have an EDI lens and a CABR lens. Staff that currently we're working with the EDI team to ensure that the work is aligned and that staff are aware of the overlap and the different ways in which the CABR strategy supports the EDI strategy and the EDI strategy supports the CABR strategy. Next slide, please. So one of the important things about the way that we are doing our work is that we're ensuring that it's aligned with the City of Toronto's CABR unit. We are currently sitting on the city leads table that tracks the progress of the City of Toronto's Confronting Anti-Black Racism strategy. And we are meeting, we have and continue to meet with Anthony and his team to ensure that we're working together. We've also modeled the center based off of our learnings from the CABR unit at the City of Toronto. So they started with a team of 6 staff, and their team has grown to 14 to respond to the growing need for anti-Black racism expertise and support. The unit also has an additional roster of anti-Black racism trainers who do the training and education for the city. There are also numerous city divisions that have currently hired their own anti-Black racism staff to support their teams, including Shelter Support and Housing Administration, TESS, Children's Services and Pension, and Payroll and Employee Benefits. What this tells us is that there's a need to hire and bring in anti-Black racism specific expertise into different city divisions that also have, so for example, also have a shelter expertise and anti-Black racism expertise with a shelter expertise. Further, other city divisions are relying on the CABR unit, on CABR unit approved external consultants to provide expertise and support in executing divisional initiatives related to the city's action plan. And so what our plan has done and our model has done is learn from the CABR unit's model, the way they've expanded the responsiveness and the future direction of the unit. By transitioning roles from the center directly into TCHC's divisions over time, we recognize and account for the day-to-day expertise and supports needed to effectively deliver the TCHC strategy. I'm going to pass it back to Sheila.
Thanks, Evelyn. So I won't take long on this slide. You heard a very good, thoughtful deputation earlier that outlined a number of these points, but I just wanted to highlight one point, and that is that within our company today, there is minimal institutional expertise in the area of anti-Black racism. So these incidents, anti-Black racism, are bubbling up every day amongst staff out in the field with our tenants, tenants to tenants, tenants to staff, staff to staff. So these incidents are occurring every day. And as a company, without the implementation of this strategy, we are ill-equipped to deal with them. So while it seems like taking 10 FTE from divisions, from their existing FTE complement, and bringing those FTE in the center may seem like a big number, but there are incidents happening out there on the ground every day that staff are dealing with, not well, but they're dealing with. So by having the center, we take some of that load off of staff, help them understand how to respond effectively, and boost our satisfaction rate. And I just wanted to highlight one other point. We want to demonstrate to staff and tenants through this model that the board has a true commitment to confronting anti-Black racism. We want to ensure that our plan is sustainable, practical, and will live long into the future of the company. Next slide. So next steps, with your approval today, we will build out the center. We're finalizing the TCH specific work plans. We'll be reporting out on those to the board this year in 2021, and you will see in those work plans the detailed actions that are being put forward to confront anti-Black racism. We'll be establishing the tenant and staff oversight body and also working on data collection and evaluation methods. So, board, Mr. Chair, the recommendations are in front of you. We are looking for approval on the 2022 budget. The budget that is outlined in the report, $2.168 million, a permanent staffing model for the center, 5.5 FTE at a cost of $663,000 that we'll be bringing back to you as part of the 2022 budget cycle. We are not requesting an increase in subsidy from the city to accommodate this work. We have confirmed with the city that there are no additional resources available through the city's CABR unit. The cost of the additional 10 remaining FTE at just over $1 million and $422,000 in programming costs will come, as we have said several times, through the existing 2021 FTE complement and program budget. So, Mr. Chair, with that, it's over to you for any questions.
Okay, directors, thank you, by the way, Evelyn, Nadia, and Sheila, appreciate it, and thank you for coming and the thorough presentation. Directors, any questions, comments?
I have a couple of questions, Tim.
So I've got Paula, I have Anna, I have John, I have Debbie.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Paula.
The question, Sheila, this is just on some of the stats that you've given us. I'll give you all the questions and then you can answer them. The first one has to do with the satisfaction rates, and 70, I think, I forget the percentage, and then for Black tenants it was 50 something and overall satisfaction is 70. I'd like to know if those are correlated to communities, if you've correlated those to any communities, or if those are populated evenly across all of the all of the portfolio. That's one question. And then on trying to our significant Black populations in TCHC going to the city, I think that's one of the new way we're organizing things. I think superintendents, general managers, and others can start identifying some of those communities where we're not waiting for a research bureau. I'd like to have your comment on that. I'm shocked that we wouldn't know that already or have a good understanding to start with. The third is you mentioned there's a lot of issues coming forward now, and I'd like to hear a sampling of what they are. I think that's useful for us to hear. And fourth, this is Dara and I had a conversation about the Neptune 4 and my letter to Tenant Services Committee. I thought I could bring this up here today. So those are my three big buckets of questions. And then for the Neptune 4, which didn't happen that long ago, it might be very helpful to have our new unit actually look into what happened. It's a very clear example of what happened to the tenants, how well were they supported by TCHC, and what happened to the managers, what happened to Toronto TCHC staff, where this was a very clear incident of just carding, brutally turned into a beating. And I would like to have that. I need that. The corporation needs that. We can't have, one of the reasons why we have this unit is to, I think, bring everything up that would not happen again. So I've still got Neptune 4 on the table, and can direct anybody to folks who might need to know more information, because there's so many new people at TCHC. So those are my questions, Sheila, the top three questions, or anybody from the unit that can answer those. Thank you.
Sheila.
So I'll start. In regards to the tenant satisfaction survey 2018, we needed somewhere to start with, how do we measure the impact? How do we establish a baseline? So we turned to the last tenant satisfaction survey. That survey went out to a sample of households. So what we did was look at those sample households, which households identified as Black, which households did not. And that's where we got the stats from that I gave you. 78% of households that did not identify as Black had customer satisfaction at 78%. Households that did identify as Black had a 58% level. So that is something that we will build in a more...
No, I think she was asking a
no,
different
it wasn't
question,
my
which
question.
was, do you have
Thank
it
you,
broken
Jim.
down by community?
I'd like to have it broken down by community. So we see that there's particular communities with a sampling where there's big issues.
There
And
may, now the
or there
challenge
may or
might
may not
be,
be.
the challenge might be, to be fair, if it's a sample, that the sample size might degrade to a non-representative error size as you shrink it down.
But you know what?
So
it's at least
a
sample size.
Sorry.
You
We
can't
can take
do that?
addresses and map them to community. Okay, we can do that. The second question, we're not waiting for the information to come from others. Evelyn and her team, and I'll ask her to speak to this, are currently mapping data to our hub structures, that we understand where in our portfolio do we have a high percentage of Black tenants. Evelyn, do you want to pick that up?
No, I just like Sheila, I want to go back to the other piece, because for me that's pretty standard, that I'd like to have those communities identified. I'd like us to know those communities. I think that's pretty significant. And if it's a sample of only, if it's a very small sample and how many people replied, etc., that's pretty important since you're using this as a baseline. So a baseline needs to be a very accurate one, and I'd like to see that augmented. Number one, were questions asked in that survey that was, I'm just going to ask for people's experience as being a Black tenant in TCHC, and if there were any issues with that or not.
So the tenant, go ahead.
I can speak to that a bit. So some of the questions that were asked in that survey were like question one, or part of it was being respectful to tenants, where the TCHC average was 74%. And then the Black average was about 66%. And then keeping tenants informed about changes that affect them. And so they were general high level questions. And then we were able to see how Black tenants answered that question and how non-Black tenants answered those questions. The
I
questions
understand. Yeah,
around,
I hear you. So I just want to correlate that a bit further, and I'm not arguing with anything. I'm just looking at, number one, you're looking at communities, and I think TCHC, if our staff can't tell us where there are large communities of Black tenants in our portfolio, I'm surprised. And that's up to the second piece. But in the first one, if you're looking at that and it's correlated for everybody, that means we just have management problems in communities, which we're always looking for. Or if you have the same community that you have tenants answering, this is important. Black tenants answering, they don't feel respected. White tenants answering from the same community that they feel fine. That is one research point. If everybody that answered from that community says, I don't feel respected, then we have a different problem, not only an anti-Black racism problem, we just have a management problem, which is something that, starting with the reorg and with Sheila's work, we are definitely trying to alleviate. So this is just one piece of information that helps everybody. That's my goal here, is to understand on the ground and also understand currently which communities are out there that have very large Black communities. And I could tell you my buildings, I know the ones, but I think somebody knows that at TCHC.
Do, and we're mapping that, Councillor.
Okay, there was one other question.
Yeah, there was another.
And the third question, you were looking for examples of experiences that are bubbling up today.
Yes,
and
please.
I'm going to ask, without getting into any privacy issues,
I'm not asking for names, I'm asking for
issues.
Categories. Yeah, thank you.
Nadia, Evelyn, please be frank.
So we've had numerous calls where tenants have been experiencing anti-Black racism historically from their neighbors. And so these are people that either live directly in their community or directly right beside them, with issues of like vandalism, for example, derogatory names being called when they're leaving their units, and sometimes the tenants that are causing the issues refusing to go through a mediation through the TCHC mediation process. We also had similar situations where tenants didn't know who to call when they were experiencing these kinds of tenant disputes. And so those have been raised with us. There have been issues regarding tenants that are going through eviction processes and feeling like they're being discriminated against because of the way the eviction process has unfolded, or different pieces of information or different experiences around the eviction process and how that's happened. Regarding some of the issues with the Black trans tenants, the difficulty that we've been seeing there, and it's happened in more than one occasion where there is a requirement or folks either calling CSU or the police. And sometimes that is presenting a difficulty to these tenants in terms of getting service. So calling the TPS, for example, and then being referred to CSU when they're experiencing, again, these are tenant disputes or being targeted by other people in their buildings. So that has been identified as a huge barrier. One of the things that we also recognized in that through these kinds of conversations is that sometimes tenants are calling the call center instead of calling CSU. And for some reason, it seems more Black tenants call the call center rather than calling CSU when they're having issues. Sometimes that presents a different experience in terms of who shows up or the kind of supports that they're getting. On the staff front, we've had staff call and mention that they're experiencing racism from people on their team, their supervisor, or racism from clients or tenants, on the front line. So tenants not wanting to work with specific staff, or tenants speaking, using derogatory language around staff, and us not having the ability to really address or respond to those issues if your manager doesn't really understand why, that is a racist experience. So those are some examples of some of the issues the escalations that are coming to our team.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
Okay,
Um,
I've forgotten who we had next. Was it Councillor Bylaw or? No, I can't remember.
Councillor Fletcher had one more question, referring Neptune, the incident that happened with the Neptune for to the center, and that is one of the duties and responsibilities of the center, to be able to understand what happened there and report out on it. Wanted to
Yes, so
offer
I'd like to, whenever that would be, that report, I think that's an important public report. Many staff were fired. The kids were, I don't know if they've been exonerated or what help they got. And only recently were the police, 10 years later, was determined that there was a problem with how they responded. So this is a seminal case for TCHC.
When was that?
2012 or 2000, I have to go back and look it up. But it was pretty major. The general manager was fired, her staff were fired, the tenants were charged. Only through a long process was it determined that this was carded gone extreme with these 4 young guys who are now adults. And I think center of this nature, that's probably one of the most well-known kind of egregious things that have happened, and it's still ours. We own it. The board owns it, TCHC owns it, we still own it. And that's why I'm asking to have that looked at very quickly.
Sorry, what are they looking at?
I had a letter that went to the board and it said, please let us know more about this.
What was TCHC's role in this?
Before?
What led to the firing of the general manager and other staff? What kinds of support were provided to the families of the young men who were beaten and profiled by the police? All of those questions need to be answered. I agree with you, Paula. It's a seminal case for TCHC, and just recently, Tim, the police were found to have been at fault.
So when sorry, I'll just continue on, Debbie. Thank you very much for the letter. I got back that information isn't on file and nobody knows anything about it. So I'm keeping this going because if it's not on file, there's some interviews that have to be done. Those are still tenants in Neptune, as I understand it. There's staff around who were there. And I think it's to me, I agree with Debbie, you agreed, seminal case. It just is seminal and we still own that. It's never been looked at, never been looked into for our response, and to have a center for to combat anti-Black racism and not have that, it's kind of our truth and reconciliation moment, to be honest with you, the Neptune 4. They've never even received an apology.
Councillor Bylaw.
Thank you. So you're this year you're taking the FTEs from the different departments and you're gonna hire people with expertise on anti-Black racism, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then after the policies are developed, they're gonna go back to the different units to ensure that they're implemented. Will they still be reporting to the center or are they reporting to each unit?
Nadia?
So once they go back to the unit, they will be reporting to the respective division, but they'll have sort of not necessarily a formal reporting relationship, but they'll work closely with the center team and meet as a larger team to ensure that the work that they're doing is consistent across the divisions.
Okay, so the work is coordinated through the center. I'm just concerned that once they go back, they might not have the same latitude to implement some of the things if they're reporting to those units than if they're reporting to the center.
I can jump in there quickly just to add, because it's similar to this. The city has the city leads table where there's different divisions that sit on that table, but the responsibility of the strategy is back to the CABR unit. So it's the same kind of model where, so any issues they would be able to report back to the center, and the center would be able to navigate that, especially because the center reports directly to the CEO. So it gives us that ability to be able to navigate whatever issues are happening within the divisions.
Okay, that sounds good. And Sheila, it sounds to me that what I heard from you in terms of the finances is that, you know, you've identified this as a key priority goal in the corporation, but you're confident that we have the money in the budget to get this going with as it is presented today.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think I had John and Debbie, and then Councillor Nunziata.
It says that in 2021, programs were canceled that accounted for $800,000 in savings that will help pay for some of these positions. What were those programs that were canceled?
So the program that was canceled was the participatory budget program, given COVID, and some work on how we're going to deliver participatory budgeting. That program did not proceed in 2020.
And so what happens next year?
So next year, that PD and the principal and interest, those funds are funding the transition team. The transition team.
No, what happens to the participatory budgeting notion in 2022? Is that going to resurface and have to find money somewhere
John,
else?
we have that coming back to the board, as you remember. That was my motion earlier.
Okay.
It's going through Tenant Services Committee and then back to the board.
Okay, and then all right, so we spoke about some of the issues that have come to the transition team already. And we talked about tenant racism. How is the center going to combat tenant on tenant racism? What sort of solutions? I mean, I understand that part of the goal will be to change policies internally for our Black staff, of which we have around 320, I believe, and that we will increase sensitivity training in this whole area with staff in general. But how do you do that with, you know, the thousands of tenants that we have?
Evelyn?
So that's part of the reason we also have the tenant workshop facilitator. So one of the things that we identify through the strategy, and as somebody who comes from a training and education background as well, one of the gaps in terms of racism is people are you know, the misinformation or the lack of information or the, in relation to not just racism, but also the consequences that folks can face if they are engaging in racist behavior with their neighbors. And so I think part of the work that we plan to do is ensuring that tenants are educated about, you know, what does anti-Black racism look like? What does racism?
Sorry. Let me just, so which tenants?
All tenants. So we'll offer the workshops for all tenants, not just Black tenants.
All right. So do you really think that tenants who have racist tendencies, who have to worry about putting food on the table, are going to take time out of their day to go to a workshop on anti-Black racism or racism of any kind?
So one of the things I've talked about a lot is how do we incentivize these conversations around racism? Rather than make them punitive, we incentivize them to ensure that folks can make the time to come out to these kinds of educational opportunities. And so I do believe that there are some tenants that will do that, but there are also some tenants that won't. And we have to have another strategy for those tenants that don't. And so part of that is equipping the staff, TCHC staff, around how to deal with tenants who are engaging within this kind of behavior. What I've seen is that staff are not equipped, especially because of what you mentioned. These are vulnerable staff. All of our tenants are vulnerable. So it makes it that much more difficult to navigate these kinds of issues. But staff are not really equipped in terms of knowing when to really enforce something that is detrimental to a Black staff, because all of our tenants are vulnerable. what we're going to work on is ensuring that staff are equipped to be able to navigate these kinds of tenant-to-tenant disputes. And the reason why they exist is because I think tenant staff have historically not had the tools to be able to navigate them.
So now you're talking about putting staff in between tenants that are in a dispute. And if tenants are in a dispute, that's a potentially volatile situation. If somebody's being racist, they can do so in an angry way, and who knows what kind of violent volatility can arise out of that. And we're going to put our staff in as mediators, is that, and educators, is that part of the objective?
John,
so can I speak to that a little bit? Sorry, go
I'll
ahead,
just
Sheila.
say, Nadia, and then turn it over to you. Those incidents are happening today as we speak. And our staff are out there, and our staff don't have the tools, don't have the ability to be able to respond appropriately. And it is an issue that I have seen in this desk come forward, and I'd be happy to walk you through some of the examples. Being able to reach out to Evelyn and Nadia and the beginnings of the CABR team have really helped us resolve difficult situations.
In order to train our staff properly through this process, how many workshops a year will we be putting our staff through?
So just before we answer that, I know Nadia wanted to add something. I'm going to go to Nadia and then we'll answer.
I think my point was very similar to yours, Sheila. I think it's not we're asking folks to do something they aren't doing. It's something that we're currently dealing with. So tenant-to-tenant complaints and escalations, we deal with through the complaints department, we deal with through the regions, and the hope here is that we're giving additional resources to support so that staff and tenants are equipped. The other piece I would add is really looking at accountability for tenancies as well, to ensure that if tenants are consistently exhibiting racist behavior to staff and other tenants, how do we hold them accountable, right? So how do we ensure that it's a safe community for all? And that's part of the work of the team.
Okay, and so then the next question was, how many workshops a year will we be putting staff through?
We're currently developing the training program and the education program for staff, but I want to be clear that I think it's beyond just workshops and training, because a lot of times folks do workshops and they do training, but because our policies and procedures are still barriers, there's the inability to really be able to enact what you've learned in the training and learn in the workshop. So it's the training and the workshops, it's the looking at our policies and procedures, and it's also ensuring that the teams have the support that they need, the day-to-day support, right? So doing a training and then not having day-to-day support to actually practice that training, to actually put it in practice, means that training it collects dust. So that's part of the reason why we have the model the way that it is. So teams will have day-to-day support after doing trainings to be able to build the capacity and the competency on their own and be able to put it into praxis.
So we talk about taking to augment the 5.5 staff that are going to be there. We're going to take 10 FTE out of other departments, right? How long will they then be part of that core team before they're returned? And what happens to the work that's supposed to be being done as they're removed from their roles? So there's two questions.
So
What happens? How long are they going to be in the core group of now 15? Yeah. How long are they going to be there? And what's happening to the very important work that they're supposed to be doing out of the field?
So they're supposed to be with the core center team for approximately 18 months, and then they'll be returned. Yeah. And then they'll be returned to their respective divisions. In terms of the work that's happening now, I think that part of the conversation that we need to do in the budgeting process in each respective division is look at, are there opportunities internally to leverage positions to support this? So in terms of answering that question, we haven't done that individually as a department, but for example, I'm with programs and partnerships. Is there an opportunity to leverage a position that I have or a potential vacancy to support this effort? All of those conversations would be happening with each division once we do the budgeting process, but that's something that we're anticipating to have.
And then, okay, then because I know other people have questions. So will you be doing a survey of Black staff to measure changes, changes in the organization or how they perceive changes are occurring? Will you be doing an annual survey of Black staff? And will you be doing an annual survey as best as you can of tenants to measure changes that are hopefully coming about?
That's definitely part of the process in terms of our evaluation, and evaluating the different the different work plans and the different actions that each division is going to be taking. We're going to be very, I think, intentional about what that survey looks like, and it not just capturing maybe a change in numbers, but actually capturing a change in experience and corporate culture. So that's something that we're going to be putting together and doing yearly.
Okay, thank you.
Can I go Debbie next?
Thanks, Chair. Evelyn, you answered my first question that Anna asked. One of my concerns was that once the staff return to the division, they would be isolated within that division and not be able to move forward. A lot of our conversation so far has been on interpersonal racism. What about policy and policy changes? Who will be held accountable in the divisions? And it's probably a question for Sheila. Will the VPs have the implementation of anti-racism change as part of their performance measurement?
So ELT, your executive leadership team, every division lead is committed to this plan, and it will be a competency that is baked into the executive leadership team, PMP. Performance management plan. And I will say we've had many conversations at ELT around the strategy, around the implementation strategy, and I have the support of ELT to move ahead with this strategy in this format, and that they will be accountable as division leads for implementing the strategy.
Thank you. Govia, John, I think John's last question, not his last question, John's question around the staff coming out of division confused me. My understanding was that divisions would identify positions that they have available, not necessarily staffed.
Correct.
And then you will hire people not necessarily already employed, because they need to come in with an ABR competency. So is that correct?
That's correct. So
Okay.
The divisions are giving up FTE, or transferring.
The transfer FTEs, not bodies.
Correct.
Thank you. I thought it was striking. Somewhere in your plan, I read that eventually the center will become a place around equity in general. That issue exists now. We saw that with the Black trans example that you shared. What are your plans to immediately begin to address issues of intersectionality?
So Barbara in HR is putting together an EDI strategy that will come to the board, and it's our intention to merge that work with the center.
Well, the center right now, as it's being set up and as you're dealing with what you're calling escalations, will you address those issues as it comes forward, whether or not it's an issue of race and disability, or race and trans women, as you talked about, trans men for that matter?
Answer, but we have been. I mean, the issues are coming forward.
And what we're going to be doing, I think, with our hiring is ensuring that folks are coming in with an intersectional lens in terms of how we do the work. All of the positions, though they have maybe the same titles, they don't look the same. Their function in terms of how they will be applied, taking into account intersectionality and different kinds of expertise that folks will need in order to do the work. During the strategy, we heard a lot from older Black folks, folks that have disabilities, Black and Indigenous folks. We heard from the diversity of the Black community, and we're taking that into account in terms of the hiring and what that would look like in terms of our team.
Very good.
Okay, any other?
Good work. Thank you.
I think, yeah. Sorry, I guess I have Uba, then Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you for the presentation. And I was just wondering if we are hiring tenants and if also through this, if also we are providing this in different language and how aware tenants are about this great initiative, because I don't know if everybody knows, right? And I also agree with and Paula and Debbie, Neptune, it took forever. So it's about time for us to really look into that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Evelyn, do you want to speak to the question on the tenant hire?
Yeah, so we, particularly the positions that are the tenant workshop facilitator positions, we've imagined those to be ones that are that tenants can have those positions, and the research positions as well, which I think you noticed are part-time positions. We're anticipating that we can fill those positions with tenants who are students who can work part-time and support the team. And sorry, there was another part to your question. So the hiring and
multiple languages.
Yes, the multiple language and and the communication strategy. Yes.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah.
Yeah, we're the communication strategy is going to be very intentional around ensuring that tenants know the strategy, and not just know the strategy, but know how to use the language in the strategy in order to advocate for themselves, in order to push for change in their different areas. We're going to be using the hubs, for example, as a space for where tenants will be engaging the hubs on a day-to-day basis, and that's going to be a great space for us to promote the strategy. We've been working already with the communications team to develop, because the strategy is a pretty dense document, to develop more user-friendly versions of the strategy and posters and even and different formats. And so definitely we will be translating it, and we'll also be doing our best to be on the ground with tenants in order to talk to them about the strategy and do that work.
Okay, Councilor Nunziata.
That's one of my questions. So other than the survey, how are we going to reach out to the tenants? Is the team going out to various buildings once we get the breakdown and speaking personally to tenants?
There's two ways in which tenants are going to be engaged. So one is through the tenant and staff oversight body. And so that oversight, the tenants on that oversight body, part of the requirement of that position is that they are connected to community and connected to their communities. And so that there's a direct connection between the strategy and that oversight and tenant communities. Through the workshop, the tenant workshop positions, we imagine them to or anticipate that they will also allow us to sort of do data collection and connect with tenants on the ground. So during those workshops, what kind of questions are tenants asking? What kind of workshops are they asking for? And having that day-to-day connection with tenants. The work then should be informed by that kind of information that we are collecting from tenants. I also imagine that we will be in community, we will be in the hubs, we will be having, that's the way that we developed a strategy. So I don't imagine that changing. We've gone back to tenants reporting on the strategy and continue to have those conversations. We've had tenants, actually, I didn't mention it, but we've had tenants reach out about coming and doing sessions in their community about the strategy, and having those kinds of conversations around community development and community empowerment. So that's work that has already been happening, and we will continue to do that moving forward.
So will you be going to all the buildings, or which all the buildings that we have, or there's just specific buildings that you will be going out to?
We haven't created our outreach strategy yet. I think it goes part to the question that Paula was asking. We know the communities. Yeah, we know the communities that have a higher population of Black tenants, and those are the ones that we've been engaging actively in the past, just for the sake of time and capacity. But as the team has more capacity, we'll be able to reach out to other buildings and spaces as well, taking into account what the demographic is of those spaces.
Yeah, because I do know I get a lot of calls from tenants directly to my office, and I refer them to staff. Thank you.
No problem.
Adele?
Thanks. The report mentions that this group will be expanded to address all types of racism. I think the report mentions anti-Indigenous, anti-Asian, and I just want that would be incorporated in your planning and the timing, how your hiring choices?
Sorry, that cut out, the last part cut out for me. Can you repeat that, please?
I just wondered how you were incorporating that in your planning and the timing, and how it will.
As I mentioned, you know, from doing consultations, it was always identified that particularly the intersection between Black and Indigenous was something that we really need to think about and take seriously. And understanding that there's, you know, there are other groups that are experiencing racism as well. And so in taking into account who we're hiring, what are their lenses that they're bringing into the organization, what do the positions look like, and how do they equip us from the beginning to be able to address these particular issues as we move forward. I think part of what we're doing internally is the EDI strategy, which is going to support that ability to think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and then externally ensuring that the staff at the center are, you know, whether it's partnering for now, working with different partner organizations until we develop the capacity to be able to deal with those issues on our own.
Okay, but you're using that lens right from the beginning. It's not something that you're going to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so should we, I guess this is a motion to adopt.
Mr. Chair.
Oh yeah, John, sorry.
Sorry, I've sent a couple of additional motions to Dara.
I can share the language that I've got from Mr. Campbell. It's what's numbered paragraphs 4 and 5 in the document.
So essentially what I'm saying is we give this support for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, after which time the most of the bulk of the work, of the core of the work, should be up and done, and having had some effect, we would make a reassessment at that time, and either look to carry on with the full complement of staff, or reduce staff, or if necessary even add staff. But we do a full review after 3 months or after 3 years. And then also it was confirmed with my questions that we can do annual surveys, and that is one way in which we'll be able to, I think, you know, take the pulse of the effectiveness of the programs. And I think that's essential, that we see some sort of change occurring, you know, certainly not in the first year, but after 2 to 3 years.
So if I may, John, I think motion 5 goes beyond the nose in, fingers out board, because I think 4 encompasses an evaluation on an annual basis, and you know how that gets done, I think is a management question, and I worry a bit that we're way too directive in motion 5. I mean, look at your motion.
Well, I think it's about measuring effectiveness. I mean,
understood, but you've asked for a full evaluation of the performance on an annual basis, and I think they understand that part of that may be how it's, you know, maybe a survey, but you know, to be honest with you, to dictate that it's an annual survey of Black staff seems, you know, kind of quite fingers in. But look, if you want to move it, you'll move it. But I think it's.
Well, I haven't asked for an annual survey. I said a 3-year time frame for the initiative, and and a report annually on how it's going. And so, I mean, we can leave it up to them to determine whether or not they want to come back with a survey. If for some reason they don't come back for a survey, we may ask them, why isn't there a survey? So I just put it out there.
Yeah, and John, I would appreciate some latitude in how we measure performance. It may not be a survey, it may be through the service quality indicators, the tool that we already have in place. It may be through the tenant satisfaction survey.
Well, so, that's a survey, right? That's a survey, right?
Give us some latitude on how to do that. I would appreciate it.
Yep.
And I would also suggest, if we're measuring racism in the corporation, for tenants and staff, that we also look at other racialized folks, as the plan indicates that they will do.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree with Debbie.
So I think we're, yeah.
I believe as well that the report had mentioned that there were going to be biannual reports to the board. That's already been reported. So I would actually not like to change that to yearly report. I like the way that staff have actually committed, or we actually had the discussion when this was previously here, that we're actually going to be very on top of this as a board, and that we're going to get biannual reports. So I would like not, I would ask John if he would consider removing that part since it's already in the report.
Okay.
I asked that as well.
I didn't realize that I had missed that it said it would be reporting semi-annually then. All right. So establish a 3-year time frame for this initiative, direct the center to report semi-annually to the board. Just add in the word semi-annually to the board.
And then can I take out 5?
Yes,
I would like a vote on 5.
Why do you need that, John? You're hearing a board saying maybe you should reconsider. Do you really want to vote on 5, John?
Well, so they're going to report to us every semi-annually now, okay? So the thing is that if we don't measure the sentiments of our staff through a survey,
so I totally disagree with you.
Well,
you may want to measure, and we're asking for those reports, but the mechanics for measurement is not a board direction issue.
Mr. Chair, the reports will come back with saying what they've done. It'll come back with the staffing. It'll talk about some anecdotal evidence.
How do you know that? You don't know that.
I've read these reports before. They'll come back with how they've done, but we won't really know how to measure success unless our staff is spoken to and measured.
So is there a seconder for motion 5? So there's no seconder, John.
All right. Well, I don't know if we don't speak to our staff, I don't know how we're going to know that if we're having any success.
But John, we may very well speak to our staff, but the staff, management will let us know how it is that they're doing that.
All right. So sorry, motion 4.
I have one more question to the mover. Sorry, I have one more question to the mover.
So go ahead now.
On number 3, so what staff told us here today is that the way that they're developing this center, that there's a funding source. The FTEs already exist, and they're actually going to have those FTEs moved to the center on a temporary basis. And then they believe that the best way to do that is then have those positions embedded. And there were some concerns and questions. Debbie and I asked those questions, and they said, no, we feel like this is appropriate. So what you're saying in number 3, you're rejigging the way that the center will work, because you're saying finance these other positions and have them permanently assigned to the center. So you're changing the model that is in front of us right now.
Number 3 is not my motion.
Yeah, that's not John's motion, number 3.
Was in the report.
Sorry?
Number 3 was in the report that's in front of you.
That's right. This is basically the core, the 5.5 FTEs, not the 10 folk.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, but then I'm even more confused. So
No,
let Anna finish. Yep.
So you're asking develop a funding strategy for the center for any staff positions aside from the 5.5, but didn't you tell us that those positions were FTEs that already existed? What do you need the funding strategy?
So you have not yet approved the budget for 2022. We'll get a subsidy from the city that we couple with rent that will form our operating budget. We're not asking for an increase in subsidy. You will see.
That's not my question, Sheila. The report says that, and you through your questions, you said, aside from the 5.5, which is number 3, responds to the positions aside from 5.5, right? You're telling us your recommendation is for us to direct you to go and get a funding strategy for the other 10 positions. Meanwhile, in our questioning, what you said is that the other 10 positions are actually FTE positions that we have already in our different departments. So why do you need recommendation 3? The funding strategy existed. You just presented it here today. The funding strategy is the FTE that has already existed. Why do you need to? Did you need another funding strategy?
No.
Well, I guess hang on, Sheila, I think if I can I try to solve it this way? What we're really saying is to fund the additional positions through existing. So in other words, you don't need the strategy. The strategy is to fund it from existing positions.
Right.
So maybe so we could kind of amend the language to say, basically we're approving funding the additional staff positions through existing TCHC divisional operating budget allocations.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry about
that makes sense. And then the other thing, it says that will be permanently assigned to the center. And we were just told that these positions will not be permanently assigned to the center. They'll be there for 18 months and then returned to.
No, the 5.5 are in the center. It's the 10 that get assigned back.
That's right.
Oh, okay. So, yes,
Yeah.
you're right. You're right. I'm interpreting right. Never mind. Yeah, that part is correct. Okay, sounds good. Thanks for making this clear.
Thank you,
Tim.
Sorry about that.
God, I can't believe you're not perfect, Darren. It's shocking.
Other people would not be shocked. Does that work?
Okay, so now, and so John's added 4, and is that everyone okay with that?
I'm still struggling with the words in 3 to fund.
So
that funds any.
what it contemplates is that aside from the 5.5 FTEs, any positions that will be assigned for that 18-month period to the center and that will ultimately return to other operating divisions will be funded through existing operating budgets from those divisions.
This is, I have an empty position and I'm going to give that FTE to the center to hire somebody who will eventually come back to me after 18 months.
Okay, and what about the 400,000 that related to programs?
So we're going to proportionally allocate that based on the number of staff that will be served by those programs. So the bulk of that 422 is going to come from operations, and I can find it in ops.
Okay, and do we have to approve that as well? Because right here, we're just approving the staffing component.
So you can approve it, but we are taking that from existing budget allocation. So when
I assume that's covered by 1, isn't it?
Yeah, when you see the 2022 budget come forward, you'll see that piece.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Tim, I have another concern on number 4, and I would like to see if the mover would consider that. I would be more comfortable in saying that the board would reassess the need for the center in 3 years. I don't feel like, it seems like this initiative is not going to stop in 3 years. Actually, the result of the initiative is supposed to go on for many, many, many years and embedded in our different departments and so on and so forth. I think I'm struggling a little bit with the word for establish a 3-year time frame support. Like, I'm not supporting this for just 3 years.
I think what you're really saying, and it's John, you can say no to this, but I think what we're really saying is we want to have a semi-annual report to the board evaluating, and that probably what we'd like then is a significant review of its operations, success, et cetera, at the end of 3 years.
That's fine.
And so in other words, we don't establish a three-year
Reassessment is,
timeline.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so that at the end of 3 years, we're gonna have a big, how is this working?
But listen,
Yeah.
After 3 years, if there's, racism is never going to go away. I mean, what we're doing is we're bureaucratizing a process that will probably carry on forever because racism, despite their best efforts, is never going to go away.
Yeah, that's a little unfair of a characterization, I think, but from bureaucratizing, I think the point is to try and give our organization the ability to better deal with it and make efforts to improve it.
I'm happy with the reassessment.
Okay, Dara,
I
can
just said
you?
we have a
Yeah.
model that we're approving and we'll reassess. It might be a different model. It might be the same model.
Correct.
We have a model that we're.
Yeah.
So once you're ready, Dara, if you could pop that motion back up.
All right. Mr. Campbell, is that satisfactory? Direct TCHC to staff to
I
report
thought
back
we
to
had
the board.
semi-annual in here.
Yeah.
But semi-annual is existing.
It's in so it's covered by where?
It's in the
2?
original recommendations that will be for the board.
Oh, so we've already approved that?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I think instead of reassessment, shouldn't it just be an assessment?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's if that's okay with you, John, I think that's
fine.
Okay, so I have a mover of that. Debbie, seconder, Uba. Any final comments? All those in favor? Great. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate
Can I
that.
ask
Was a very, yeah, Counselor.
Yeah, just a question. So the report that we have in the agenda on the recommendation, does that have to be adopted as well? And what we just approved is the additional recommendations? Sheila?
So the recommendations that are in the report were covered in the motion that you approved.
Okay, so just ignore them because I'm just looking at your report and your recommendations. So that's deleted and we just placed a new recommendation. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you.
Didn't we just add a fourth to that?
Correct.
Because I'm
We
looking at the
clarified
report. Yeah.
We clarified a point in number 3 that was confusing. We clarified that and you adopted new recommendation 4.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we adopted that report. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so what did we have as our time frame for this? Are we over time or on time or late or what's happening?
We had scheduled this till 11:30.
We're well over. I'm going to have to drop off, Mr. Chair.
So in some offline conversations with the Commissioner of Housing Equity, she had suggested that we might defer her two reports as items 7A and 7B with the understanding that they'll be the first items after the consent agenda for the next board meeting in July.
That seems fair.
Because so if the board is satisfied with that approach, we can deal with those matters expeditiously that way through a deferral.
Is there any action item in any of the committee reports?
The OCH 2020 work
Not
performance.
OCH, I meant the subcommittees.
Oh, sorry.
So item number 6, the COVID response and recovery, was an update, Mr. Chair, that you provided the substance
Framework
of
for,
that remarks. And that's for information.
Yeah, so that's what I'm just trying to focus. If there's anything we need a decision on as opposed to information and what's left. I don't think so, but.
So there's the COVID report, the OCH report, which you're moving to the next meeting, and item 7, the corporate goals for revitalization.
And
Yeah.
Councillor Fletcher had sent me a motion in relation to the last item to refer part of the matters addressed in that report to one of the board's committees. I don't know if you want to deal with that now or
Sorry,
defer
which
it.
is that? Which I don't even, what item?
7C.
7C, the corporate goals for revitalization. The councillor had suggested that the goals and objectives regarding securing opportunities for tenants be referred to Tdsc for further discussion, or sorry, governance for further discussion. I think it may more appropriately go to tenant services, but
Sorry, Derek, yeah, Dara, I made a mistake. It should have been the tenant services. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, we also have 2 deputants for 7C.
we do.
Yeah.
Well, we're running out of.
Could they be deputants at the Tenant Services Committee, which would probably have better input?
Well, probably if we deal with the item, we're going to have the deputants.
Yeah.
So
We don't have them on the line yet, and it would take a few minutes to connect with them. We could, given that they haven't deputed at this point in time, and given it's an information item, it may be that we can either have them depute at tenant services, or if the matter that's being referred to tenant services comes back up to the board, they might depute at that time.
So I think, why don't we take it as read that those items can go to GHRC?
Tenant services.
Or tenant services, sorry, correct. I mean, I just think tenant services can kind of take it up on its own initiative, frankly. Since it's an information item. So that we don't.
At tenant services, May 4th, and referred to the board. So we're sending it back to tenant services.
Oh, that's weird. Okay. So what did you have in mind, Paula?
Just want to be clear on the scope of the tenant employment. So I just need that section back, not the whole thing.
So why don't you just take it up at tenant services, John, if he's left, but
John's gone.
Since you've referred it up, you can actually say, can we ask some more questions about that at tenant services? Okay, so I think they're all information items, and I'd prefer not to engage an item if we don't have to. So can we defer the rest and adjourn? Since we're an hour and 15 minutes over. Motion to adjourn. Everybody, seconded by everybody. All in favor. Thank you, everybody. Ciao.